Welcome back to the first annual Halloween special. Today we're going to learn how to play the 1 to 8 player cooperative dice game, Elder Sign, by Richard Launius and Kevin Wilson and published by Fantasy Flight Games. In Elder Sign, the players take the roles of investigators in 1926, and the return of the Ancient One is imminent, so the players must race against the clock as they adventure through the museum to find tools, clues, allies, and occult knowledge, and most importantly, the Elder Signs, the Eldritch symbols that are the only thing that can seal away the Ancient Ones forever. Let's get to the table and let's see what's in the box. To set up the game, place the clock in the playing area and make sure the hand on the clock is set to 12. Then place the entrance sheet nearby along with all of the dice that come with the game. Next, you need to pick the Ancient One that you're going to be fighting against. There are a bunch of Ancient Ones in the game, and you can choose to either agree on an Ancient One to fight against, or you can just have one picked randomly. For the sake of this tutorial, I'm just going to go with the one that was on the top of the stack. There are many things about the Ancient One that you need to know. The track up here is their Doom track, which is how many Doom tokens they need to awaken. On the Doom track, there are two types of spaces, Doom spaces and Monster spaces. If you were to place a Doom token on a Doom space, nothing would happen. If you were to place a token on a monster space, however, a monster will appear, which I will get to later. The number you see in the middle is the amount of Elder Signs you need to collect in order to stop him from awakening and win. The text on this side is a special ability that the Ancient One has that will impact the game that you will be playing. The text over here is the attack ability. The attack ability occurs whenever the Ancient One awakens and whenever you reach midnight on the clock during your final fight. And the symbols up here is what's known as the battle tasks. And those are what you're going to need to roll on dice in order to successfully battle against the Ancient One. I'll explain the attack ability and the battle task a little later. Take all of the monsters that are in the game and place them into a container that the players can all randomly draw from. For my sake, I'm just going to use a coffee cup, but you can use whatever you want. Next, take all of the adventure cards, shuffle them up, and then deal 6 of them out into the play area, and these will be the starting rooms that you will have access to. The rulebook says to place them in 2 rows of 3, but you can really just place them out however you want. The rest of the cards in the stack can then just be set aside. They will come up later on. Similarly, shuffle all of the other worldly cards and then place them next to the adventure deck, but do not deal any out. These come into play later in the game. Gather all of the common items, the unique items, the spells, and the allies, shuffle them into their respective decks, keeping them separate, and place them all face down near the adventure deck. Then give each player an investigator. There are a bunch of investigators in the game, and similar to the Ancient One, you can choose to either just have everyone draw one randomly, or you can have everyone agree and choose which investigator they want to be. Each investigator has a few things you'll need to know. This number here represents your starting sanity and your maximum amount of sanity that you can have. The heart represents how much stamina you have and your max amount of stamina. Down here is a special ability that only this investigator can use during the game, and down here is the starting items. Each investigator has a certain amount of starting items, and they will each be shown in this box. For example, Joe Diamond starts with a common item and a clue. So when setting up the game, make sure each player gets the corresponding number of tokens for their stats, along with all of the equipment that they start with. Just a quick side note, the type of item that is on the items that you start with do not matter. The only thing that matters is what's inside the text box down here. Also, make sure each player gets their investigator's corresponding marker and place them all on the entrance sheet. You will then take all of the player investigator markers, shuffle them together, and randomly choose one. Whoever is chosen will be the starting player, and then put everyone else's markers back on the entrance sheet. The first player will then resolve the first Mythos card. These cards have two halves to them, an immediate effect and a lingering effect. The first player will shuffle this deck, place it face down near the clock, draw the top card of the Mythos deck, and then place it into a discard pile next to the Mythos deck. You will then look at the immediate effect of the Mythos card and resolve its effect immediately. If a Mythos card or an adventure card shows a locked die icon, you will then take the appropriate die and place it on that card immediately, and it will stay there until that card is resolved. One last thing regarding the Mythos cards, I want to briefly touch on the lingering effect. As I said previously, the immediate effect will happen after the card is drawn immediately. It is a one-time, you do the event once it's drawn, and then that bit is done. Down on the lingering effect, it can have a variety of effects. Either it can have an effect that happens the next time the clock strikes midnight, or it can have an effect that simply will happen for the rest of the round. For example, this lingering effect says, investigators cannot use spells or unique items today, whereas this one says, investigators may ignore order arrows on adventure cards today. I'll get to the order arrows a little bit later. Once you have done everything that has been previously stated, you are ready to begin. On your turn, there are 3 phases that you will need to perform, and you will perform these in the following order: the movement phase, the resolution phase, and then the clock phase. During the movement phase, you can move your investigator to any open space on the board. You can move it to an adventure card, an otherworldly card that is in play, or you can move it back to the entrance sheet. Alternatively, you can choose to stay where you are. For example, I'll say I would like to move my investigator to here. After the player has moved their investigator marker or chose to keep it where it was, their movement is over and you move to the resolution phase. During the resolution phase, the player will then interact with whatever location that they chose to go to. Let's go over the entrance sheet first. If you chose to resolve the entrance sheet, you have one of 3 different options to resolve it. You can either receive first aid, search the lost and found, or buy a souvenir. If you would like to receive first aid, you will choose then one of 3 options. You could choose to either recover 1 sanity or 1 stamina for free. You could spend 2 trophies to fully regain your stamina or your sanity. I'll explain trophies later on. Or you could spend 4 trophies to fully gain back both sanity and stamina. If you would like to search the lost and found, then you will roll 1 die. And depending on what you roll, you may get something. If you roll a scroll, like I just did here, you can gain a clue token. If you were to roll a skull, then you would gain a common item. If you were to roll a terror, you would gain a spell. If you were to roll any investigation, whether it's 1, 2, or 3, you will lose either 1 sanity or 1 stamina. The last thing you could do at the entrance is to buy a souvenir. You can only buy 1 souvenir per turn, and you have a variety of options to choose from. You could spend 1 trophy to get a clue, 2 trophies for a common item, 3 trophies for a unique item, 4 trophies for a spell, 5 trophies for an ally, or 10 trophies for an elder sign. This is one of the 2 ways that you'll be able to get elder signs in the game. The other way to get elder signs is by resolving adventure cards or otherworldly cards. In order to resolve an adventure card or the otherworld cards, you have to match all of the tasks on the card with the die faces that you roll. Each adventure card has a few things in common, but also has some differences with each other. What each of these cards have in common is that they have a number in the top left corner, and this is how many trophies they are worth. If you were to complete this card, you will take the card, place it in front of you, and it will be worth that many trophies that you can use later on to buy souvenirs or to receive first aid. Another thing adventure cards and otherworldly cards have in common is that you will have at least one horizontal row of symbols that are known as tasks. And in order to complete the card, you will have to complete each of these tasks on the cards. I'll get to how you complete the tasks a little bit later. And the last thing that each card has is these two boxes down here. The one in the white is basically the rewards that you get if you can successfully resolve this adventure card. The one on the left is the penalties that you will suffer if you fail to resolve it. There's also a couple of things that all the cards have in common, like having a title on the card and some little text up here, but this is just flavor stuff. You don't need to worry about it. It does not affect gameplay. There are also a couple of things that will be different about some of these cards. For example, this card, in addition to having the tasks, the rewards and penalties, and the trophies, this one has also an arrow. What this means is that each card that has this arrow on the left side, that means that that card's tasks must be done in order from top to bottom. Normally you could complete these tasks in any order that you want, which I'll get to later on. Some cards also have either a white box partially surrounding or fully surrounding a task, or just have an empty white box. What these are for is that these spaces are reserved for monsters. Throughout the game, there will be times where a monster will come into play. If you ever need to place a monster, simply just reach into the container that you have all the monsters in and randomly draw one out. Each of these monsters will have their own line of tasks that you will need to complete, which again, I'll get into the symbols later, but when you have to place a monster, if there are any of these white boxes that are out on the play area, those will be where the monsters will first go. The last thing that some adventure cards and otherworldly cards can contain are what's known as terrors. And what terrors are is that if you were to roll to complete a task and you failed, which I'll get to resolving tasks later, but if you were to fail a task roll and you rolled a terror face, you must suffer the effect of the terror's effect on that card. Now, like I said, in order to resolve an adventure, like I am attempting to do here, you will need to roll dice in order to match the symbols that are on the card. You will begin attempting to resolve the adventure by rolling the dice in your dice pool. At the start of an adventure, the dice pool will always contain 6 green dice unless otherwise instructed. After you've rolled the dice, you will then compare what you've rolled to the tasks that you need to complete. There are 6 types of symbols that can show up on the green dice. Scrolls, investigation, which can be numbered 1 through 3, terror, and one that I didn't roll, which was peril, or a skull. And each of these are the symbols that you'll use to try to resolve the cards. If you are able to satisfy a task's requirements, for example, this one here, I can successfully complete this task by combining these 2 investigation dice into the 3 that the task requires, as well as spending a terror, and that task will be completed. You will then assign those dice to the task, like I just did here, to show that that task was completed. Assigned dice are no longer considered part of the dice pool for the rest of the resolution phase. If completing a task would require you to suffer some form of penalty, like in this card for example, where I would lose 1 sanity, you would do so once you complete that task. There are 3 different effects that you may have to suffer when attempting to complete a task. One is this symbol here, like I said, it will force you to lose 1 sanity. This one means you have to lose 1 stamina, and this one means you have to turn the clock forward 3 hours. Another thing to keep in mind is that the player is only allowed to complete 1 task per roll, even if you had the dice that you needed to complete multiple rolls. Also keep in mind, when you roll the dice and you have the ability to complete a task, you do have the option to not place the dice on the tasks if you don't want to. If you cannot place any dice on a task, or if you don't want to place dice on a task, then that roll is considered a fail. You must then take one of your dice, discard it, and then re-roll all of the remaining dice and try again. You will then continue to do this until either you have successfully resolved the adventure, or when you have discarded the last die. If you manage to complete all the tasks on the card before you discard your last die, you have successfully completed the adventure. And if you do that, you will gain all the rewards listed on the bottom right corner of the card. If, however, you are forced to discard the last die before completing all of the tasks, then you have failed the adventure, and you will suffer all of the penalties that are listed in the bottom left corner of the card. There are some cards that you will have to resolve that have a terror effect on them. What a terror effect does is that if you roll to complete a task and you are unable to do so, and you ended up with even one of the dice rolling the terror symbol, you must suffer the effect of the terror listed on that card. In addition to the terror effect on the card, you also must suffer any terror effects that are on the current Mythos card, all before discarding the die due to the failed roll. For example, this one says for its terror to lose 1 stamina. In this case of the card, I would take 1 stamina and remove it from my character sheet. You would then discard a die as normal, and you will try again. Now would be a good time to talk about what all the various rewards and penalties actually mean. For each of these symbols that are on the rewards that you will get, you will draw a common item. For each of these icons, you will draw a unique item. For each of these symbols, you will draw a spell card. For each of these symbols, you will draw an ally card. For each of these icons, you will draw a monster randomly out of the container and add it somewhere to the cards. I'll get to adding monsters a little bit later. For each of these icons, you will gain a clue. For each of these icons, you will draw an otherworldly card and place it face up near the other adventure cards. Otherworldly cards act as adventures that you can go on, but they're much harder, but also give greater rewards. For each of these icons, you will lose a stamina. For each of these icons, you will lose a sanity. And finally, for each of these icons, you will add a Doom token to the Doom track. Anytime you need to add a Doom token to the Doom track, add it to the first open space available. And make sure you go right across the rows. Never add the Doom tokens going vertically. If a player managed to successfully resolve an adventure card, you will gain all of the benefits listed in the bottom right corner, like I said. You will remove all the dice from the card, returning them to the die pool. You will take your investigator, moving them back to the entrance sheet, and then you will take the card for yourself. And the reason why you would take the card for yourself is for the number listed in the corner here, like I talked about earlier. These are the trophies that you will want to try to collect in order to spend them on souvenirs or on first aid. You will then draw the top card of the adventure deck and place it wherever the one that you took was. If you had failed to resolve the adventure like this, you will suffer the penalties on the bottom left corner of the card, like I talked about before. You will remove all the dice from the card, putting them back in the dice pool, and the card will stay where it is. A couple quick notes about the Otherworld cards. If you were to successfully resolve the Otherworld card, you will simply take that card and add it to you, but do not replace the Otherworld card that you took. Otherworld cards can only come into play once you have successfully accomplished a card that had the Otherworld symbol on it. Also, there can be any number of otherworldly cards in play at one time. After you've attempted to resolve a card, whether you've succeeded or not, or resolved the entrance sheet, your turn is over and you advance to the clock phase. In the clock phase, you will then advance the clock forward 3 hours. This is because the game begins at midnight and is only advanced in 3-hour increments. Whenever the clock strikes midnight after a player's turn, you will then draw the top card of the Mythos deck, perform whatever immediate effect has occurred on the Mythos card, and then endure whatever lingering effect that is going on the bottom half of the Mythos card until the clock strikes midnight again. After the player has advanced the clock, their turn is over, and the next player begins their turn. Now before I continue any further, there are some things back in the resolution phase that I wanted to mention that can help you resolve the adventure cards. One of which being adding dice to the dice pool. Most of the common items and the unique items are going to give you an opportunity to add yellow and red dice to your dice pool. During your turn, you can choose to discard one of these cards in order to add the corresponding die to your die pool. Any dice that are added to the pool will stay there until you either use the die to complete a task or discard the die. Unless they are locked or they are secured by a spell, both of which I will get to later, dice that are added to your pool must be returned to the supply after your resolution phase, whether or not you've used them. Another thing you can do is to spend clues. After you've rolled your dice, if you find that the results aren't what you wanted, you can spend a clue token to re-roll any number of the dice that you want. Simply pick which dice you want to re-roll, take the ones that you want to keep and set them aside, and just re-roll all the leftover dice. And you can do this as many times as you have available clue tokens. Any clue tokens you spent are returned to the supply. There are also a few ways that you can secure dice for further use, such as focusing. After a failed roll, the player who is taking the adventure can focus one die. To focus a die, simply choose the die you want to focus and place it on your character marker. Make sure when you do that, you do it without changing the die face. To use a focus die to complete a task, simply remove the focus die from the marker and place it on the task you wish to complete, along with any other dice that you need in order to complete the task. At the end of the resolution phase, any unused focus dice are returned to the die pool. One thing to note is that you can only focus one die after a failed roll, and you can only focus once during each of your turns. Another thing you can do is to request assistance. After a failed roll, a player can request assistance from another player whose investigator is on the same card with him. To request assistance, you first must discard one die due to the failed roll. Then you will request assistance from one player whose marker is on the same card with you. If that player agrees to assist, the active player will then take one of the dice and place it on that player's character. That die will now function as if it was a focus die. It can be used on a later roll in an attempt to complete a task. However, if the acting player fails the adventure while a player is assisting him, the assisting player must choose to either lose one sanity or one stamina. One important thing to note is that you may only request assistance once per roll. The last way you can secure dice is by using spells. Most of the spell cards that are in the game are spell locks, which are marked with this icon. To use a spell to secure a die, you will simply play the card in front of you after you have rolled the dice. After the dice are rolled and the card is played, you may then choose one die from all that's available and without changing its face, place it on the card. Once a die is secured on the card, it will stay there until a player chooses to use it. And it can be any player, or until another effect locks the die, and I will get to that later. After all of the dice on a spell card have been removed, you will then take that spell card and place it on the bottom of the spell deck. One important thing to know is that new dice cannot be added to replace the ones that have been removed from the spell card. That is everything that you can do to help you succeed in your adventures. If at any time a character were to lose all of their stamina or all of their sanity, that character is devoured. When an investigator is devoured, you will add 1 Doom token to the Doom track. The owner of the character will then return the card, its marker, back to the box. Any items, allies, or adventure cards that they collected over the course of the game are returned face down to their respective decks. You will then select a new character from the stack, grab all of their starting items and stats, and you will continue playing as that character starting on your next turn. If there are no remaining investigators to choose from, that player is eliminated from the game. If a player's investigator was devoured during his turn, they will immediately proceed to the clock phase, and then he can choose a new investigator. If the Ancient One awakens as a result of an investigator being devoured, that player is eliminated from the game. The clock will still advance as normal, as if his turn had just occurred. Every time the clock strikes midnight, you will resolve the following things in this order. You must resolve all the at midnight effects on all the cards that are in play, including otherworldly cards. Also resolve any the next time the clock strikes midnight events on Mythos cards. Draw a new Mythos card and resolve its immediate effect, returning the previous Mythos card to the bottom of the Mythos deck, and then replenish any once per day investigator abilities. Anytime you have to place a Doom token on the Doom track, you will place it on the leftmost space on the card. There are 2 types of spaces on each of the Ancient One's cards. There are ordinary spaces and monster spaces. Anytime you place a Doom token on an ordinary space, nothing else happens. Anytime you have to place a Doom token on a monster space, a monster must be drawn out of the container you've placed them all in and placed on a card. Anytime you need to draw a monster, you will randomly draw one out of the container you placed all the monsters in, and you will place it on a monster task. There are 3 different types of monster tasks: an empty task, a full task, and a partial task. An empty task is simply a white border with nothing inside. When you place a monster on an empty task, that monster now becomes an additional task that must be completed in order to resolve the adventure. If you were to place it on a total task, that monster then replaces the current adventure's task that it was placed on. For a partial task, you will simply place the monster only covering the part that is covered with a white box. That monster is now part of the current task that you must complete. If a monster appears and there are multiple monster tasks that it can be placed on, the players choose which monster tasks that it will be placed on. If there are no monster tasks available, the players can choose any card they want and place that monster below the adventure card. This also can apply to other world cards. This now becomes an extra task that the players must complete. One thing to know is that when distributing monsters, they must be done evenly, meaning no card can have 2 monsters on it until all the other cards already have 1. If a monster is placed under a card that has an order arrow, then this monster becomes the last task you must complete to resolve the card. If a card's reward would cause a monster to appear, that player may then choose to place the new monster onto the upcoming card to replace them if he wishes. Resolving a monster task is just like solving an ordinary task. Simply use the dice you have at your disposal, place it on that monster's token, along with any requirements that the monster has as well, and you can resolve that monster. If you defeat a monster task, you then collect that monster at the end of your resolution phase. Remove any dice that were locked by the monster and put them back in the dice pool, unless there are multiple locks on it, which I will get to locks later. Remove the monster from the card and follow any instructions that are on the back of the monster token. When a player completes a monster task, but if he fails the adventure, he will collect the monster token before suffering the penalties on the card for failing. In order to defeat a monster that is on a partial task, both sides of the row must be fulfilled before you can defeat it. Simply defeating the monster's token but not filling the whole row does not count as defeating the monster, and it will remain there until the whole row is satisfied. There are some adventure cards, mythos cards, and monster tokens that will feature a locked die icon. Anytime a lock comes into play, place the appropriate die on those locks. Those dice can no longer be used until they are freed from the locks. This applies even if the die is on a spell card or an investigator marker. To free a locked die, the card or effect that is locking it must be resolved. For example, this card is locking the yellow die. So in order to free the yellow die, this adventure card must be resolved. Likewise, this red die is locked by this monster token. So in order to free the red die, you must defeat this monster. If a die is locked due to a mythos card, it stays locked until a new mythos card is drawn at midnight. It is also possible that a die could be locked by multiple effects. Whenever this happens, the die is locked in the order of which the events occurred. For example, if this monster had been placed first and then on a subsequent turn this monster was played, then this monster is what contains the locked die. Once that monster is freed, the locked die is freed and then immediately is placed on the other locked die icon. Only after all icons that contain the locked die are removed can the die be truly freed. After the final Doom token is placed on the Doom track, the Ancient One awakens. Once the Ancient One awakens, immediately discard the last mythos card. Its lingering effect is immediately ended and any dice locked by that card are now free. If there are any dice that are locked by adventure cards, other world cards, or monster tokens when the Ancient One awakens, those dice are removed from the game. The players then immediately move all of their player markers to the Ancient One's card. They can no longer be moved from that card for the rest of the game. If the Ancient One were to awaken during a player's turn, that player immediately goes to the clock phase of their turn. If a player puts the final Doom token on the track as a result of an award or failure of an adventure, they receive all of the rewards or penalties from the adventure card before the Ancient One awakens. If a game effect would cause the Ancient One to awaken before the Doom track was filled, place all of the Doom tokens on the remaining available spaces of the Doom track. If the Ancient One does awaken before you can collect enough Elder Signs to stop him, then the only way to win will be to defeat the Ancient One in battle. After the Ancient One awakens and the battle begins, players will then take turns resolving the following two phases in order. First, the attack phase. During the attack phase, the player whose turn it is will roll the dice, attempting to complete as many of the Ancient One's battle tasks as possible. Each Ancient One has its own battle task. If a player's roll successfully manages to satisfy the Ancient One's battle task, you will place those dice on that Ancient One's battle task, similar to assigning dice to complete the adventure cards. For each successful attack that you make, you will remove one Doom token from the Doom track. Also, similar to the adventure cards, if a player cannot satisfy the battle task, then he must discard one of the dice from the dice pool and then roll the dice again to try to complete it. Unlike getting adventure cards, however, when you're battling the Ancient One, you cannot focus or request assistance, but you can use allies, items, spells, and clues as normal. If a successful attack removes the final Doom token from the track, the Ancient One is defeated and the players win the game. During the clock phase, while battling the Ancient One, the players will advance the clock 3 hours as normal. However, anytime the clock hits midnight during the final battle, instead of drawing a new Mythos card, you must resolve the attack effect on the Ancient One's card. If a player's investigator is ever devoured while battling the Ancient One, add a Doom token to the Doom track and they are eliminated from the game. From now on, their turn will only consist of the clock phase. One thing to note is that if the clock strikes midnight at the same time the Ancient One awakens, you will resolve the attack ability immediately. Another note, while battling the Ancient One, at midnight effects do not occur. The game ends immediately when one of three things happen. 1. The players manage to get enough Elder Signs to match the amount shown on the Ancient One's card. 2. The players successfully manage to defeat the Ancient One in battle. Or 3. All of the players' investigators are devoured. If all the investigators are devoured, you lose. If you defeat the Ancient One in battle, or if you get enough Elder Signs to match the card, you win. And that is everything you need to know in order to play Elder Sign. As always, if you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments. I hope you all enjoyed this video. If you did, give it a big thumbs up. If you want to know my thoughts on Elder Sign, or if you want to know how to play more games, make sure you subscribe to the channel for more tutorials, reviews, and unboxings. Thank you all as always so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video.